UFC 274. I kind of want to jump into that a little bit. Looks like a pretty good card here. What's your take on that first fight, Cerrone versus Lozon? Obviously two guys that have been around, right?
Right. I think those two fights, Cerrone versus Lozon and Shogun versus
St. Preux.
OSP.
Yeah.
Yeah. So both of those fights, when you have guys that are older, maybe can't do all the things they used to be able to do. A lot of it depends on, and Cerrone kind of alluded to this in his interviews, who kind of shows up ready to fight, whether they want to be there, whether they're in it mentally. Some of the intangibles may play a bigger role in both of those fights because both these guys can't do the things that they used to do effectively at the same level. So those ones will probably be harder to really pick an outcome.
I feel the same way.
Because sometimes he shows up, Cerrone looks like he's really ready to go, and other times he doesn't look like he's ready to go at all. Lozon, I would say Lozon has always been a ground fighter. He was always known as a guy who was good on the ground even before he started fighting. He had a reputation out of Massachusetts. A lot of the guys who started kind of the internet forums, the early internet forums, were based out of Massachusetts. Keurig Janis and Chris Palmquist, and Lozon trained with those guys. So he already had kind of a reputation on the internet forums because those guys were running those forums at the time. And he's always been a ground guy, I would say. Cerrone's good on the ground, but
definitely
stand-up's a strong point. So it'll be interesting to see who can make the fight the way they want it. I think the other fight's a little bit more even because those guys are mostly stand-up guys, I would say.
It's interesting, too, because when we look at both these fights, it's not like you're getting one of these older guys who've been around who's fighting an up-and-comer. It would be a lot easier because, you'd sort of be able to get more of a clear-cut decision there because the up-and-comer might be more explosive, more athletic at that point in his career. But like you said, it's four guys here that have been around, right, that maybe aren't as skilled athletically as they once were younger in their career. Do you think that either of these fights, it's like, obviously we know Cerrone's going to retire, right, after this fight, which only brings me to another question of, Cerrone, you just alluded to, sometimes doesn't show up, right? And I think it's the big stages sometimes that kind of get to him, like the McGregor fight. But this is a fight where they're putting him back onto a main card of a pay-per-view, and it's a retirement fight for him. He's getting a lot of attention in the media now, so is it a fight where he's going to show up? It's interesting.
Yeah, plus he said it's the first fight his son's going to be at. So it'll be interesting to see how he performs because he kind of made that a focal point of his interview.
Super emotional about it.
So it'll be interesting to see if that affects him. He kind of made it seem like that's going to have a big impact on him. He seemed to make it seem that way.
Yeah, I agree with that. If you watched the press conference, he definitely wasn't hiding that. So what I was going to ask you originally before that was, do you think that these two fights, it's like, because obviously we know Cerrone's retiring again, you think that these two fights is sort of kind of like loser is done? So like, let's say Joe Lozon loses, right? We already know Cowboy's losing. If Joe Lozon loses, you think that could be it for him in the UFC? And then same for the St. Preux versus Rue of Shogun fight. You think that could be it for either one of those fights?
Well, I don't know because a lot of that depends on their contract and if they want to keep competing. So really that would probably depend more up to the promoters. I mean, I think it's always a possibility in the fighter's mind when they're that old and maybe they have a bad loss or a few bad losses. They could always say they're done. But relative to their contract, I don't know, how many fights those guys have left, whatnot. If they don't want to be finished, then it would be up to the UFC to decide that. So,
right, and that's why I asked, because we obviously know that the whole contract thing is a one-way street with the UFC, right? Like they have all control, so they could just cut you whenever they want if they feel that you're done. If they gotten the best out of you.
Yeah, it's definitely a possibility that they could do that for any of those guys.
Definitely. So next fight, we got a fight that's it's one of the more exciting fights in the card, right? Michael Chandler versus Tony Ferguson. What's your take on that? That's certainly a big fight.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting. I just was talking about the two older guys who's going to show up. Here, I think it's the same. We're all wondering.
Similar case, yeah.
Tony show up. Is Tony ready to fight again, or is he? His last few losses have been pretty bad. Is he going to get run over, or is he ready to show up and kind of be Tony Ferguson before? So in a way, even though these are two guys that aren't as old as the previous two fights we're talking about, that factor with Tony is there. I think Chandler's going to show up and fight the way he fights. Chandler's an incredible athlete. A guy who trains ridiculously hard and all that. He's going to fight. I'm not worried about him not showing up. I'm just wondering, is he going to run over Ferguson, or is Ferguson going to be ready to fight him?
The thing about run over Ferguson is, Tony doesn't really get finished. Now we could maybe start to question, is he like 30, 38 now, something like that? Chandler's like 36. But as far as Tony goes, he's never been finished, really. The Gaethje fight was that was a stoppage, but he was still on his feet. Like, they just decided he couldn't take any more. So I don't know. I think I see more of a drag-out fight, like a 3-round fight, because I don't see any. And Chandler showed he had a chin too. I don't think Chandler's gonna get hit with anything in terms of power in this fight that he hadn't felt in the Gaethje fight. There's going to be more unpredictable stuff, but power, I don't think it's any question Gaethje packs more of a punch than Ferguson. That's what I think. So,
yeah,
I think we're going to see a 3-round fight here, a 3-round war. I don't know. That's just my opinion. But back to what you said, it is a similar fight to the Cerrone versus Lozon fight, because these guys aren't young pups either. Tony Ferguson's like 38. Michael Chandler's 36, if I'm not mistaken. So, yeah, these are guys. Tony Ferguson's on a 3-fight losing streak. He loses, that's 4 losses in a row. Michael Chandler's on a 2-fight losing streak. He loses, it's 3 in a row. So it could be a crossroads here too.
Yeah, you're right. Absolutely, it could be a crossroads for both. The reason I was saying Chandler would run over Ferguson is Chandler fights at a pretty high pace. He's kind of an explosive fighter. His movements are explosive. He comes out and he fights pretty aggressively. Gaethje, he was with Trevor Whitman when that was like his first fight, or maybe second fight with Trevor Whitman. He was kind of telling him to slow down, initially, after he was trying to kill him in the first couple of rounds, But Chandler, he fights really aggressively, so I wonder if it's a fight where Ferguson's taking a lot of punches, or maybe Chandler's taking him down here and there and kind of mixing that too. If it's going to be to where he kind of cracks a little bit. That's what I was thinking, because Chandler's a pretty aggressive fighter. He doesn't really wait. He doesn't take his time to do what he's going to do. He comes after his opponent, especially since he got in the UFC. It's almost like he's fighting more of a low IQ fight, and just to be entertaining. So he's fighting really aggressively, and he's done that in all the fights he's had in the UFC so far. He's been very aggressive.
I agree with you 100%. Chandler has all the tools to be a world champion, to win fights. Like, there's some of his fights, there was no excuses. Like the game plan against the Gaethje fight, like instead of just being smart and utilizing wrestling, trying to actually win the fight. I agree with you on that. But yeah, it's the thing about Chandler too is Chandler. We've seen Tony Ferguson get taken down by Kevin Lee and beaten up. We've seen Tony Ferguson be very susceptible to big shots, whether it's on the feet, on the ground. So, I don't think it's question that Chandler's going to be able to get to him. But, yeah, it's going to be interesting nonetheless. I agree with you on that. So, the next fight, it's we got Rose Namajunas versus Carlos Barza, right? That's obviously the strawweight title fight. Any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I think Namajunas, I was just thinking about this a little while ago. I think there's not a lot of fighters who do everything well in mixed martial arts. I think fans think there are more people than there are. Namajunas is like that. Masaki's like that. There's a certain fighters that they can fight wherever they need to, or whatever their opponent's going to do. They can execute, whether it be wrestling or striking, jiu-jitsu, whatever. So I think that's why it's going to be hard for Barza to beat her, or for anybody to beat her. I know she lost once. She lost the fight where she got slammed, but it's difficult to beat her because she's so good everywhere, and I think Esparza's going to have a hard time beating her.
Yeah, and it almost seems like there's a cream of the crop to that division too. Like you look at Weili, Joanna, and Rose, it seems like they're almost levels ahead of the rest of the pack. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think it would take a specialist like I don't think Tatiana Suarez fights at that weight class, but what I'm talking about is somebody like that. where they're so good at one thing, wrestling preferably,
That's what I was
where they
thinking
could
about.
just make it that fight for the whole fight. Someone like that could maybe beat Namajunas, but they would have to be like elite, because elite can beat somebody who's good at everything. But other people, if they're not elite at anything, it's going to be hard to beat someone like that, or hard to beat Musafi or GSP or someone who's good to great at everything. It's just real hard to beat them.
I agree, especially with the Tatiana Suarez thing. I'm a big fan of hers. I think she's one of like the very few female specialists, like true specialists in wrestling in UFC, at least for females. So I think she'd be a problem if she was. The injuries has just held her back. But I agree with that. Now we got the main event. It's Charles Oliveira versus Justin Gaethje. What do you think about this one?
Either guy could win. I mean, Gaethje has the power to knock anybody out, and Oliveira has the skills to beat him. Here's another guy that kind of like we're talking about with Namajunas. Now, I wouldn't say he's great at wrestling, but he's good enough. He can get fights to the ground. He did against Ferguson. He's elite on the ground. His stand-up is getting better, so I think it'd be better for him to take Gaethje down because obviously he's a lot better than Gaethje there. But Gaethje can wrestle. I'm sure he's been working on that because his strategy is going to be to win the fight standing up. So it's going to be, can Gaethje get to Oliveira before Oliveira? Now, Oliveira probably will try to strike with him some. I don't know how much. He said he's going to. But I think it would be better for him to try to get the fight around because if he tries to get the fight down, it's like a percentages. Less danger for him if he gets the fight to the ground, a lot less. If he stands, there's a percentage chance he could lose while he's doing that. He might be able to win. I mean, he did stop Chandler, but to me, if he's able to get Gaethje down, the fight is his to win. But if he doesn't, Gaethje's got a chance to knock him out, of course, or bust him with the leg kicks too. Gaethje's real strong with the leg kicks. So if it's standing for long portions of the round, yeah, Gaethje could win the fight. Of course, either one of these guys could win the fight.
Yeah, it's definitely a close fight. I think Oliveira is definitely good enough to, to hold his own in the stand-up. He's shown it, especially coming up throughout his last 4 or 5 fights. He's definitely much improved in that department. But one thing about Oliveira that worries me, and I am picking him to win the fight because I think he will get this fight to the ground and just do what he does, get him out of there eventually. That's just what I think. But one thing that worries me about Oliveira is we obviously saw him get hurt bad against Chandler and Poirier, right? Is that something that's going to come back to life in the Gaethje fight?
Right. That's what I mean. I think if there's one guy you don't want to stand with in the UFC, it's Gaethje. He's got explosive kicks. He can knock people out with punches.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's just a guy that you don't want to stand with for too long. But when he's taken down, when like Khabib took him down, once he got him down, it was pretty easy for him to get to where he wanted to go. And I think it would be for Oliveira too, because he's very high level. So it's just who's going to do what. If Oliveira tries to, take the risk of standing to prove something, or he has trouble getting Gaethje down, then I think it's more favors Gaethje.
You think there's any chance Oliveira can get Gaethje in the stand-up if he starts threatening the takedown enough or threatening the submissions?
There's always a chance, with the 4-ounce gloves. There's always a possibility. But I think a standing fight is more percentage for Gaethje to win than him.
Yeah, I agree with that, absolutely. And Gaethje, there's only so many leg kicks you could take from Gaethje. Oliveira is very light on that lead foot, which is going to be a very good thing, particularly in this fight. But I think Gaethje, there's only so many of those you could take before you go out. So it's like Khabib, was taking a few of those, right? Took 4 or 5. He's like, all right, I have to take this fight to the ground. This thing's going to go south if I stay standing with this guy.
Yeah, precisely. Eventually, Khabib realized, I have to get this to where I have the highest percentage chance to win soon. I can't sit here and play in this area with this guy for much longer. I need to get to the ground, then the fight's mine. And that's what he did.
One last question about this one. Do you think Gaethje's a better fighter than he was when he lost to Khabib? Do you think he's improved?
Man, that's a tough question to answer. I mean, I don't. If I trained with him, I could know.
Because we saw the Chandler fight, right? Like based off the Chandler fight, I mean, it's tough to say, right? Because Chandler didn't really fight very smart, and we just saw another Justin Gaethje war. But I think that's what my question is going into this one is because I think Oliveira is going to win. You know, I think he's going to submit him. So it's going to be interesting to see if Justin Gaethje makes adjustments.
But that is kind of Justin Gaethje in his career. Even before he got in the UFC, that's what he was known for. When the war starts, that's when the fight starts. You know, that's kind of what he was always known for. Kind of like Arturo Gatti in boxing.
Yeah, definitely.
When the war started, that's when he started fighting his best. And that's kind of how Gaethje is. In the UFC, he's knocked some guys out quicker to where he didn't have to have wars with them. Some of the guys. But he's had some wars too. So that's kind of his personality as a fighter, is get into a war. But I know they're trying to get that out of him, guys like Trevor Whitten. But sometimes that's the best thing to do, is take what a guy does well out of his personality. You know, it's hard. And the other thing about this fight is when you have someone who can execute takedowns, or who's really dangerous on the ground. Now I know Gaethje's probably thinking, if I get taken down, it's not going to be my fight. You know, I'm probably going to lose this fight. Is that going to make him hesitant, you know, to do what he does? Because he lost to Khabib that way. And he knew the same thing in that fight. If I get taken down, it's his fight, not mine. So it's hard for a guy to pull the trigger as much when he knows the guy across from him has a huge advantage to beat him if he gets a takedown. So it'll be interesting to see how aggressive he is. Does he stay back? Does he try to kind of sprawl and brawl a little bit and not be too overly aggressive to put himself at risk of takedown? That will be interesting to see. Because I think with Chandler, it's different. Chandler, yes, he'd take Gaethje down or something, but it's not a thing where, I'm going to get submitted as soon as Chandler takes me down. I don't think he thought that. You know, he just thought, we'll scramble and we'll be back to our feet and we'll fight again. With Oliveira, it's different. If he's going to take you down, it's kind of like Khabib. If he's going to take you down, it's their fight now. You know, it's going to be over. And so it'll be interesting to see if that makes him hold back a little bit.
It's going to be a great fight. I can't wait for it.